All right, so good morning and thanks for having us. I was told that we should try and focus on tips, and more tips. Be very practical about it. And so the story we're about to tell today has 2 chapters to it, but it's part of the same story. So my name is Bradley. I head up the program office for the Human Capital Department or function within ABSA Group. And
I am Ilhaam. I'm the Group Head of Talent Acquisition for ABSA.
Excellent, excellent. So Ilhaam and I have been partners in crime for the past year and a half, and Ilhaam gracefully offered to utilize her part of the function to help us to implement the SAFE framework. So when we started the journey, if I get into it, when we started the journey, it was really about understanding how we're going to implement scaled agile to help us deliver a lot better. And it was also part of a bigger imperative around building agile behaviors and agile ways of work within our function so that we can improve the productivity and the efficiency and effectiveness of the function. So thank you to Ilhaam and her team for working closely with us. I've got quite a few of my team members in the audience today, so a big thank you to all of them for the entire journey and the highs and lows that we've gone through in the journey. Okay, so what I really wanted to touch on, I mean, there's many points we can touch on, so I'm not going to dwell on all of them because some of them are fairly known to you and you'll recognize a lot of them. You all have access to the packs, and if you have more questions, you're more than welcome to link with me on LinkedIn, and I'll kind of share as much as I can in terms of some of the detail around some of the areas I'm not going to touch on today. Okay, so lessons really fall into a number of categories. So if we look at the first 2 you're very familiar with, get buy-in. If you get buy-in, 90% of the battle is won. And I won't say it's easy sailing from there, but it's a huge part of it, right? Do I have any tips on how to go about doing that? My talk doesn't focus there, but again, if you reach out to me in terms of how to go about the advocacy and winning over the people, we were very fortunate. Our group CPO, Chief People Officer, she bought in immediately. It made things a lot easier. All right, so I know it's not the most practical tip in the world. How did you get there? Might be a lot more useful, but we were very fortunate in that the planets aligned that way. Talk about funding. One of the most important lessons there from an agile perspective we'll share very quickly. And a very key area I picked up in my conversations, the importance of continuous exploration. I'll provide some good tips around that aspect of the journey. We'll mention a bit about effective analysis. We had some of the previous speakers talking about the importance of the different kinds of thinking, especially design thinking, and then some of the lessons around being flexible, being practical. One of my former colleagues, I'm not sure if he's in the crowd today, Baron Cronje, some of you might know him, he has this term that he calls best practical. Not just about best practice, about being practical, but combining them. And so credit to him for coining the term, but it's really about that, being practical and doing things that work for you. All right, and just some of the softer things around not being dismayed and not being disillusioned when you face failures, but focusing on your wins, acknowledging the things that don't go right. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, I mentioned executive sponsorship. I'm not going to dwell too much on that. You know the importance of that. If you don't get buy-in, it's going to be a very, very tough struggle. And so your executives with your senior leadership, it's more about the buy-in from a strategic perspective, then from an operational perspective with your access to resources. Get those sorted, and it's 90% of your battle won. All right, funding, again, you've got sponsorship, you've got executive buy-in, your funding kind of falls into line. But here's one of the big lessons I learned in terms of the mind shifts. Don't try to fund projects. I know it sounds a bit simple and it's like, but what do you mean? It's like, okay, you go and you dissect the project and you put budgets together and you go and look for the funding. If you try to fund the teams that are working on the project, it works out a lot more seamlessly. And then be very brave when you negotiate the scope of what the team's going to deliver. you do it within the parameters of what the cost of the team are, forcing people to prioritize. So you know when that team delivers, they're delivering things that are prioritized, and it makes your life so much easier. It simplifies the accounting, the reporting, and it helps you to focus on what's important. Give the team the right work, let them deliver. And that for me is one of the best practical tips you can ever have when it comes to traditional project to moving to an agile mindset. Try to focus on funding the team. All right, if I move to the next slide. All right, I spoke about continuous exploration. Now, those of you that are familiar with the SAFE framework, you will know that things can get a bit hectic. People go into the planning, you go into your PIs, you go into your sprints, your retrospectives. We all speak the language, right? But very often, and we found out quite quickly, where's the next piece of work coming from? And we go into the next PI planning, and not that it was overly chaotic, but there was a huge gap. You know, what's next on the plate? Why? Because you're not staggering your thinking and your planning, and you're not creating the space to feed the work into the team. So you're funding the team. Now you need to feed the work into the team. And you need to feed the correct work into the team. Because ultimately the team is there, and the team is made up of delivery people. In their DNA is like, I'm delivering, I was successful. And they're right. So if you're not feeding them the right work at the right levels, then you end up in your PI planning at the beginning of your next increment, and there's nothing to do. So very, very important that you take continuous exploration serious. You have the right people there, and you do a lot of what we used to call in traditional project management, the front-end loading. You got your BAs there who are looking at new problems. I see Andries in the crowd, architecture solution people sitting there, and they're creating that pipeline for the next work, so that you're making sure that you're picking the right things to do. You're working with your business people to prioritize the things, so that when you go into your next PI planning, you're focused on the correct things that you have a very high confidence are going to contribute business value. So very, very key lesson that we learned. We didn't get it right at the beginning, but as we grew in maturity, we realized more and more the importance of continuous exploration. Now, if you're running a big program, for example, where you've got some portfolio management, it might be useful to look into some of the LPM, the lean portfolio management concepts, especially around the portfolio syncs and the portfolio reviews, and allow them to work in tandem with the continuous exploration. Now, I know some of the Safe Inc. people might be like, why is this guy tearing apart our framework? This comes to the principle of being practical. We found that if we had too many of these forums, it was the same people and we were stretching people thin. Where there's overlap, be practical. Collapse it into one, just make sure your agendas cover the original purpose of what each of those forums and ceremonies were meant to do. Because SAFE, to their credit, they put a lot of thought into all of this in terms of what's in the framework, and there's value to it. So you can still preserve the value, but you don't need to incur all the overhead of having all of these different forums with the same people meeting over and over and over. That's what I mean by be practical. You save the premise and the value and the intent of what that original forum and practice was made to deliver, but you allowed to be practical and rearrange those things. All right, so I spoke about effective analysis, and I know I'm running out of time, so I also want Ilhaam to share some of her lessons. So I mentioned SAFE as an anchor, very rich foundational framework, very, very rich, and I love it. Those of you that know me, I like these rich frameworks. Lots of research goes into it, lots of best practices, but take them out and become best practical. Apply them in a way that works for you. And that first 6 months, we learned a lot until we were able to combine these things in ways that worked for us. So be open. Be open. That's part of the agile mindset. Be open. Try things. If they don't work for you, admit it. There's nothing wrong with admitting it. And then move on to something else. All right. And it goes without saying, and I think Ilhaam will touch a lot more on the move on from failures, focus on your strengths. We had some notable failures, but it makes you stronger, right? I mean, I can't say too much about the specifics, but we had some good failures, and you look back on it and you're like, okay, we learned, we grew. All right, and focus on your strengths. So our ability to pivot, our ability to measure properly and then cut and get it right as soon as we start to pivot and get the forums right and get the right people, have the right conversations, make decisions at the right level, we started to get that right. We're now 18 plus months in, and we just finished our 5th PI, was it, now in July, and it went so much better. I mean, it's a pleasure actually showing up there. So very, very key. And so I'll wrap up we spoke about the importance of leadership support. We spoke about the importance of focusing on teams and funding teams, and the importance of adapting to change. So that's it from my side. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Bradley. Okay, so Bradley, as the partner in crime, is the diplomatic one. I'm probably going to be less diplomatic. It was hard. It was really hard at the beginning. So let me start with, firstly, can I just ask a question? Who in the room is from business, not technology? Anyone from business? Awesome, yay. It's a lot less than what I was hoping for, but you're in the room. So I think a lot of, in a traditional, large, very complex organization, many ask the question, why in business? Because it's known to be more of a technology framework or tool. But there's value in being agile. And so I think let's maybe just park the methodology, because I think it's largely just more a mindset than a methodology or ways of work. And so the first thing for us from a human capital perspective, and more specifically in our talent acquisition community, was to know our why. And the why is just tapering down from our business strategy into our broader human capital strategy, and then fundamentally understanding how does talent acquisition serve our broader strategy. It is not disconnected, it is very much integrated. And so for the teams, it was important in ensuring integration, first and foremost, again in a very large organization, the one problem statement that we were faced with, and many other organizations, I'm sure would say the same, is that we are exceptionally siloed. Corporate organization, so you show up as one organization on the outside, but on the inside you are so segmented. And that was the one biggest problem, because the one team is not talking to the other, and it causes disconnect, a lot of it, spending a lot of money unnecessarily duplicating efforts across an organization if you really just take the time to step back and understand what it is that you're doing. The other problem statement, because of that disconnect, is that often from a group or COE perspective, in trying to serve your client who is business, there's this disconnect. Right? Because they're not in the room, you're driving strategy, and then when it comes to operationalizing that strategy, it falls flat. Why? Because you don't have your customer in the room. So a couple of things was to understand the why from a much bigger picture, but then to relay the why back to the team. What's in it for us as a talent acquisition community, as a human capital community? How does this improve our lives and then the lives of our organization, our customers outside? So it's to really unify how we deliver across global teams. So we're a Pan-African organization with a global footprint, and it was fundamental for us to understand those nuances that exists outside of South Africa, outside of our adult markets as well. And it's not just about a one-size-fits-all. I think one of the speakers spoke about it, especially when it comes to that customer value proposition, that customer experience. And so through building cross-functional agile teams, it's creating one room, one platform where you have all of the necessary stakeholders so that you make decisions really, really quickly, but you also truly co-create. So it's not a dictatorship of group telling and dictating to business what should be done and how it should be done, but really a co-creation that serves both our candidates in our context as well as our users internally, because we tend to forget, we tend to build and build to make the experience of our candidates better, but we forget that the users are also our stakeholders. So how do we improve those experiences? And then designing journeys that really that delivers real value faster. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story. Shortly before we implemented Schyff, we were presented with a few journey maps, very high level. And I asked the question, okay, great, who helped co-create these journeys? Like, which of the users, which of the teams? And the answer was none of them. So I'm like, then that's not a journey map. If your user is not in the room, it is not a customer journey map. It's a dictatorship of what it should look like. And very often, we miss out on the key experiences and the efficiencies that we can bring and the value we can bring. So please, design thinking, I think Bradley mentioned it as well, exceptionally key and an amazing tool and ways of work and thought process to bring into a room to really define what that looks like flexibly, because the world is evolving at such a rapid pace that you need to be able to, it's a dynamic piece of work. So please, I think that was one of our biggest lessons learned as well. So really creating that visibility in PI planning in all of our sessions was exceptionally important. Visibility, transparency builds trust. Listening builds trust. Creating a feedback loop and a psychologically safe environment for people to share builds trust, and trust is fundamental to making any implementation work. Showing value really quickly is also how we continue to build trust. And then, as I mentioned, creating that safe space, not only to innovate, but also the ability for us to pivot really, really quickly. So structure, clarity of roles, customer centricity, flow and visibility, and then that test and learn mindset. If it's not working, I think for many that has come from a waterfall type of environment, often you go through months of requirements analysis and gathering. By the time you actually develop, the world has shifted so much so that it's no longer applicable. I think in our space, what has been really great is that we're able to identify those blockers very early on, and we're able to identify whether something will work or not and make decisions really, really quickly as to how to move forward or not, and what the risk is if we choose to do so. So it's really looking at things from a holistic perspective, the full value chain that has really been helpful to us as a team and then as an organization. So the role of product owner in HR was really to be the voice of the candidate and business, so really being the middleman. And that has really been hard. I said it was hard. So I think in first PI planning or, honestly, I didn't know whether I was Arthur or Martha, and nor did my team know whether we were Arthur or Martha, because we just felt there were so many ceremonies, so many sessions, and it almost felt like there was just too much. And we kind of took a step back, and this is change. Whether we like it or not, each and every individual resists change on a human level. And it was about acknowledging at that point where I was at, where my team was at, and what actually made sense. And to Bradley's point, how we needed to make things work for us, because we're so stuck in, we must have this and this and this, without necessarily understanding the value behind each of those ceremonies. So when we really took the time to reflect and understand what are we looking to gain from our stand-ups, from our PR planning, from our retrospectives, it made a lot more sense. And I know it sounds really, really simple and almost logical, but we almost take for granted that people just know. They know what a retrospective is. They know and we don't. They don't. So really to take the time for people to understand is key and critical. I think we had a phenomenal team, and I'm not being paid to say this, but IQ Business has been phenomenal in partnering with us, not from a training perspective only, but really partnering with us and holding our hand through the journey for the first few months was really great. That perspective was also needed because I think many of the speakers mentioned it yesterday. It's really, really hard when you're stuck in working in a certain way to even change your own mindset. So I'm going to, for me, that's, if anything else, please take that away, is that we need to acknowledge and meet people where they are at, but also take a look in the mirror and also acknowledge that sometimes we ourselves are struggling as well, and that's absolutely okay. So prioritizing value, and not all requisitions are created equal, so I use the word requisitions because TA, but really not all pieces of work is priority. And it's really about looking at what is going to add the most value to our users, internally and externally. What are our quick wins and what are our long-term gains? What can we do now in order to build for tomorrow? But what can we do now to really make that experience really phenomenal, and find the balance in both? If you're going to focus on one or the other, you're going to miss out on a lot of value in the interim. Again, I'm not going to harp on that too much because Bradley has mentioned that. I am over time, but managing backlog amidst shifting needs has been, challenging, but finding that rhythm of what is BAU, what do we need to do as a tribe, versus that continuous exploration becomes very key. And I can assure you we're not there yet, because you think about where we're at from a culture perspective, from an organizational effectiveness perspective. There's multiple dependencies, and aligning our priorities and our dependencies to the broader organization has been challenging. However, it has also helped us to say, well, what do we need to hold off on until such a time that that foundation is ready for us to build on? And so a large part of the last year and a half was really spent in ensuring that we build a solid foundation that is scalable, that is flexible, and that is agile. And I'm not going to mention, with the rise of AI, as we all know, particularly hitting human capital and talent acquisition in a massive way, how do we begin to find that balance between technology enablement and really the high-touch human connectedness is absolutely key. And I firmly believe that will continue to be our superpower. So we've launched with 3 value streams, 2 actually last year, 1 in talent acquisition, the 2nd in onboarding, and the beginning of 2025, we launched young talent, and hopefully scaling to employer branding and assessments early in 2026. So just in a nutshell, I'm not going to go through all of this. I can tell you it started out very chaotically. First PR planning was chaotic. Important, take a step back, slow down to speed up. Remember that. We need to slow down in order to speed up. And it may sound easier said than done, but that requires the buy-in. That requires very hard, difficult, courageous conversations to say, I cannot deliver on this right now. These are the reasons why, but this is how we're going to get there. So again, transparency worked really well. The defined roles really improved accountability. The cross-functional collaboration was phenomenal. And then having a diverse set of minds in a room to even challenge ourselves has been a phenomenal learning journey. Challenges, again, more feedback, no failures. Moving from a largely traditional organizational ways of work into more agile, forward-thinking, proactive ways of work, that's always a challenge. But again, being human-centric and people-centric and understanding where people are at mentally, physically, emotionally is important. It is not fluff to take the time and pause and say, how are you actually doing, and meet. So let's park deliverables, let's not talk about outcomes, let's just focus on people. You'll be amazed at how powerful that alone becomes as you move forward and you're driving outcomes. So again, wellness is last on the list here, but it's definitely not the least. We've had a number of different wins, user experience, the ability to deliver incremental value consistently over the last year and a half has been amazing. And to that, I just want to acknowledge, because I know my last slide, and I'm happy again to share all of this, but I'm very much over time, is just to say a massive thank you to our real MVPs and our teams. Many of you are in the room. Massive thank you to our RTE sitting over here, our Scrum Masters, our project support team, and many others in our technology team that has attended, and from business as well. Just a massive thank you. We could not have done this on our own. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Well done. Let's take one or two questions. Is there any questions for Ilhaam and Bradley? Maybe one question or so. There's a question there. Can you speak loudly? Come with the microphone. There you go.
How big was the group? Just want to understand the quantity of the team size that was part of this journey.
So it grew and it shrunk depending on where we were. At its biggest, the largest tribe we had was just over 75 people, but it's consistently been between about 50 and 75, and that was Ilhaam's tribe. We are now moving to a second tribe in a different part of the organization where we're looking to bring on about 25 to 30 people. So the scale has been a bit of a disappointment because scaled agile, right? You can't just move with all the overheads if the scale doesn't justify it, so you don't get the benefits. So on that front, it was a bit disappointing because we had hoped to grow it a bit more, but we did grow it very, very successfully into the talent area with just under 100 people.
Awesome. One more question? Yeah. Here's a question, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
What tooling are you using?
Jira.
Just Jira, nothing else.
I must say, Jira and Excel, actually, for now.
Excel?
Yeah. Yes, I tell you, Rome wasn't built in a day when I tell you pain points. But Jira, yes.
Yeah, so look, again, I mean, the philosophy is get the mindsets and the behaviors first. You go and you spend these inordinate amounts of money on all these fancy tools, and before long they fall into disuse and you scratch your head. And so the philosophy has really been that. We utilize Jira not as much as we should. Most of our reporting, well, you'll see in one of my slides, a big challenge for us was the aggregating of the reporting. It's still very much manual, but it works. And I think that's the important thing. Technology is not the silver bullet. Yes, if you do things right and you bring technology in at the right time, you're going to fly. But get the mindsets right first.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say something else?
Yeah. No.
One more question. Okay, last one, Natya. I know everybody by name. Can you see? Mate.
What were the challenges that you faced when you moved to value streams? That's one of the things we're facing.
Yeah. There were a few, but the people, the mindset, by far the biggest challenge. And again, that's why I stress, meet people where they are at, listen to what they're saying and listen to what they are not saying. Because very often we are all striving towards the same outcomes. We really are. But people are uncomfortable with change. We resist change. And we need to have these open, honest conversations. And when you actually have the conversation to understand why, it actually has nothing to do with us and everything to do with where people are at and the context of where an organization has come from. So context is critical. There is no one size fits all. And so take the time to understand your environment, your people, upfront. We had to do this. We had to kind of pivot after PI planning to understand it, because again, it's that, logically you think people should know and people should understand, and it's not the case. Yeah. Hope that helps.